That's my old company, Magnum Motion Pictures. Now no longer. I'm Bill Lustig, co-producer, director of the movie Vigilante.
And I'm Andrew Garoni, and I'm the co-producer of Vigilante.
And it's now May 2010. I had this idea to do a commentary with Andy and I because of all the times I've been talking to students at School of Visual Arts, having questions about the actual nuts and bolts of making a movie. And there's no film that is better example of guerrilla filmmaking than this movie. In fact, this scene was the very first thing we shot about a month before shooting, before principal photography. We shot this using cameras as that we got from the camera house that we were going to do camera tests, and we convinced Fuji to give us film that we could test Fujifilm to potentially use it for the feature. And we got the lab to develop it all for free. So actually what you're seeing cost us nothing but the cost of maybe catering for the crew, and I think to fly Fred Williamson in.
Yeah.
And but that's what you do. We use this as a promo for for a film festival to do pre-sales. I don't think we actually did pre-sales. Did we do any pre-sales?
No, we didn't do any pre-sales, but we had a sales agent that had done very well for the first film that Bill and I produced together, and he directed Maniac. Irvin Shapiro, a great sales agent, films around the world, and he wanted us to shoot something that he could bring to MeFed and, potentially start the ball rolling on pre-sales, but I don't think he walked away with any.
I know we generated a lot of interest. I remember there was this one guy whose name I think is Lars Nielsen out of Scandinavia, who when he saw the promo at MeFed went absolutely nuts over it and was like the first territory to buy the movie when it was finished.
Yes, Jan
Nielsen. Yes. That's it.
A Swedish distributor, very, very, very funny guy.
Anyway, so it was good because we were able to get the word out on the movie, and then when we finally screened the film about 6 or so months later at the Cannes Film Festival, there was already an awareness of the film, so it was a good move to do. A little bit about the casting. Robert Forster was not our first choice for this movie. In fact, he wasn't even on a list for this movie. The first choice was Tony Musante, who we actually hired to star in the film, but hadn't formalized it. Andy, you want to tell a little bit about the Tony Musante?
Well, we were both big fans of Tony Musante's work, especially the Anonymous Venetian.
Right, the Anonymous Venetian, and also Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
Bird with the Crystal Plumage, because we had both worked actually on the production of all the New York sequences for Dario Argento's Inferno, and got to hang out with Dario and talk about all the movies that especially Bill was a very big fan of Dario's work, and Bird, especially with Bird with the Crystal Plumage. I forgot exactly what happened.
Well, then let me tell you the story, because it seems like you don't remember.
I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay. So we hired Tony Musante to star in the film, and we had what are customary meetings with your star to discuss the script and any kind of input he has on the script, and he has his wife is or was a writer, and he and his wife started to rewrite the script, and which I wasn't necessarily opposed to if the work was such that it would be more interesting. But I don't recall exactly what the work, all the details of what they wanted to change. But I recall the meeting very vividly. Andy and I visited Tony Musante at his apartment, or his townhouse, I should say, in the West Village. And Andy and I sat on a couch in front of his fireplace while Tony laid down on the ground and had his head in the fireplace looking up the chimney, talking to us. And it was just a very odd meeting. And after a series of things that seemed a little different, this was sort of I guess
The defining moment.
the
Now,
defining moment.
you just really brought that whole memory back. We
And
were just
I
looking at
remember-
each other going, uh-oh.
And what I remember was we left the meeting and we walked to the car. We sat in the car. I remember it was on 7th Avenue South. And we both looked at each other before I started the engine and said, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" And I mean, Tony Musante had the greatest respect for the man, but there was just something very unsettling about that meeting and the previous phone calls and such with him. So here we had a movie that was in pre-production without a star. We had we had Fred Williamson, but we didn't have the main lead of the film. And I don't know if he called us or we called him, but we got a hold of our mutual friend Frank Pesh in California, who suggested Robert Forster. And I immediately lit up because I had loved Robert Forster, his work, particularly a film I recently saw called Alligator. And I was thrilled of the potential of having Robert be a part of this movie. And one thing led to another, and we made a deal, and Robert came aboard within a couple of weeks of our shooting. And I got to tell you, it's resulted in a lifelong friendship. Probably one of a handful of people in the business that I've worked with who I've maintained a true friendship over the years. We'll maybe talk a little bit more about it later, but Robert was just wonderful, and his input and everything, you couldn't have asked for a better collaborator. Now, the two people who just pulled up, one is Randy Jurgensen, who was our associate producer. Randy had a small role in the movie The French Connection, where he played a cop in a car garage.
Wasn't Randy a real life?
Yeah, Randy was a real life. That's probably his gold shield.
Yeah.
His own personal gold shield. Randy was also the role in Cruising was based on a case that Randy had been a lead detective in, which was the murder of gay men in the West Village. The other person who pulled up with him is Alex Stevens. Alex was the stunt coordinator on the movie Shaft, which was his credentials for getting that role. Now, the two guys that are in this van, the one driving is Richard Bright, who was Al Neary in The Godfather, and Joe Carberry in the orange winter coat is he was featured in a movie called Short Eyes, and he was absolutely frightening. And so that's why we hired them. Here comes a great nose crunch. Okay. Anyway, so
Well, Lou DiGiamo, who did the casting, also, was instrumental in, making a lot of these suggestions and, and connections to get a lot of these actors, like Richard Bright.
now, one of the things I thought that could be interesting to discuss, Andy, would be, I guess, the mechanics of putting this all together. This movie was it was a follow-up to a very successful horror film we made. And going into this, we wanted to make a bigger film, a film that would be more mainstream, and yet still be a commercial exploitation movie. I've always been a fan of the Italian ripoffs of the Italian-made ripoffs of Death Wish, and wanted to make a kind of a film in that genre, an urban
Well,
retribution film.
we also should say that the experience that we had on Maniac, we basically made it. I think the all-in budget was $369,000. Sticks in my mind. But going into the film, we probably made it with there was a little more than $100,000 in cash and a lot of deferments and favors from the laboratory. And within a few days of screening the film at the Cannes Film Festival, we had pretty much recouped the budget, plus we were already in profits, at least on paper. So our experience with putting together, a film with, some cash and a lot of favors and deferments was a very good experience from Maniac. So I think we were confident, even though that we were going up in budget, that we could pretty much pull off the same thing that we had pulled off before. I think was my recollection of our mental frame of mind at the
Well,
time.
the idea, and this is, I think, the the theme of my life is everything I've ever started. It's always been the idea that the train is leaving the station
Yes.
and jump on board. If I had to say anything, is I never wait till 100% of everything is perfectly aligned, because if you wait for that, it will never happen.
Yes,
So
you're the first person that explained to me what the train is leaving the station truly meant, and I've used that many times in my life after that.
well, it's really true. I mean, I've spoken to students at and they're all thinking about that they want to get their budget, they need to get it in place to go out and do it. My thinking is, it really is textbook wise, it's the right thing to do, but from a practical standpoint, everybody I've ever spoken to who has actually made independent films, they they really function on the idea that they're going to just go out and make the film happen by sheer will, a little bit of money, a lot of personality, and trying to get vendors and people to come aboard, and and just try to make it happen that way.
Well, the other thing I think that's really important, at least in looking back over this experience, is I don't know what we were, 24, 25 years
It's true.
old at the time. There's a certain value in not having the life experience that tells you you shouldn't do this, right? Our approach was we did it once before with Maniac, granted on a smaller scale or smaller budget, but there was nothing in our minds that led us to believe that we couldn't do it again. So whether you want to call it the exuberance of youth, or whatever you want to call it, we just it never occurred to us that this was a bad idea. Starting a movie, having not raised the budget.
In truth, it was a bad idea. I mean, this movie was is 90 minutes of anxiety. I mean, this was a film filled with sleepless nights, and it was a very, very, very difficult experience. And I'll tell you the thing that really hurt us on this picture, or really created the most problems, is that we were trying to do something bigger and more mainstream. So all of a sudden, you had things to contend with, like Screen Actors Guild, and which we didn't have on Maniac, and Teamsters, which we didn't have on Maniac. And when you start, you know, getting involved with these leeches, and you don't have money, it's a nightmare. And once you've started shooting, all of these people have you by your short hairs, and you've got nothing that you can do. You're really at their mercy. And if you don't have the cash and you don't have the muscle, you really are very, very vulnerable. And so making this film was a real
But we
high
had
wire act.
yeah. I mean, even before producing Maniac, we had worked on films, as line producers or production managers that were union films, right? So we had an exposure. We understood, the good, bad, and ugly of working with the Teamsters. And so, again, going back to sort of the youthful exuberance, we figured, oh, we could deal with this, right? Because, but not fully realizing that, yes, our experience was with a production that had the money,
Yes, that
right?
was the
so,
difference.
so we're like okay.
They had the money in the bank. We didn't.
Bill, there's the great Pete Savage.
Yes, Pete Savage, who really was my mentor in the film business, and who I'm forever grateful, who's no longer with us.
A great guy.
Great guy. There was no one ever better than Pete. And
Responsible for putting Raging Bull
yes,
together. Thanked by, I was recently watching Robert De Niro's Academy Award acceptance speech for Raging Bull, which he thanked Pete Savage.
yeah, I'm not sure if it was this or Maniac where Pete came with us to Cannes. I'm not sure. But I remember being in front of the Carlton Hotel with Pete Savage, and there was the billboard for Raging Bull. It must have been during this picture. It must have been.
You're right.
Yeah. And there was Pete, and, and we had this film at Cannes. It was really interesting. It was very nice. But Pete is, as I said, is no longer with us, and just can't say enough about him. Now, getting back to the making of this film, again, we were of the mind that because we were so successful with Maniac and had returned profits to the investors, that if an investor on Maniac was, let's say, a $50,000 investor, we just assumed that they would become, say, a $150,000 investor.
Well, of course.
And we kept thinking that and banking on the fact that, we had this success, that we would just have, it would be relatively easy to raise money to make this movie. And as it turned out, it wasn't really the case. We had investors who had agreed to put up money who disappointed us and didn't come up with anything.
Also, we were essentially doing the investor pitches more or less to ourselves, which I think is what Bill is saying. He said, well, of course we can go back to the investors, and they're going to put, if they were, from 50 to 150, probably even 200 or $250,000. I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but certainly we needed to, have those kinds of dialogues with ourselves to just keep the movie progressing, because essentially we had already made up our minds that we were going ahead with the film,
and we were spending money.
We were
spending money. We were prepping the film, and we were moving ahead. It was do or die.
And I also think at the time, Irvin Shapiro, as I'd mentioned before, who was the sales agent on Maniac, also sales agent on Dawn of the Dead, I think we had expected that he was going to be able to do some pre-sales, not 100% of the pre-sales necessary to cover the budget, or necessary to get the distribution contracts, to bring to the bank. I think at the time the big bank that financed movies or discounted, distribution licenses was Chemical Bank. Was it Chemical Bank at the time?
It was, I think, Credit Lyonnais.
No, but there was some guy here in New York.
Oh yes, there was Chemical Bank.
It was Chemical Bank
Chemical Bank.
because we used the local branch, or Bill had started with Chemical Bank many years before this, and there was
they had a department.
Exactly, we had an expectation as well that as the pre-production process continued after we went to MIFED, that at least Irvin would bring one or two or three contracts that we could raise some money at the bank. So
look, to put it simply, I think every plan we had to raise money on this movie fell by the wayside.
Yes.
And we ultimately financed this film by not literally but figuratively giving blood, borrowing money from family, stringing out vendors, basically exploiting every goodwill we had created from Maniac we basically cashed in all those goodwill chips to be able to finish this movie. And it was stressful. I think every day, when I was, I could recall like when, I was working on, scenes from the film, running off and being on payphones to try to raise money for the film, or you know, uh, meeting with potential distributors, talking about, getting some cash from them to be able to.
I remember you talking to the two partners in Analysis Film Releasing who had distributed Maniac to much success from them. And again, the indication prior to us starting was that potentially they would come in as well, or at least we were again convincing ourselves that at some point they would come in, and it just didn't happen.
I mean, I think we came away with this experience that despite every how can I say, every disappointment, we got it finished. And I think that's an accomplishment. I think that if you can, start a film and get it finished and get it distributed around the world, I think you've done something. And I think that this was an accomplishment.
Well, there was a point where we started shooting the film, and then we literally ran out of money. I mean, we had zero cash in the bank, and so we had to suspend production on the film while we went out and tried to raise money.
Oh, that's right, we did.
However, we couldn't risk sending back. We shot the film, with Panavision equipment. Now, I've known, Dick DeBona, who's I think no longer with us, but he owned General Camera, which was the Panavision franchise in New York. I mean, I'd known him since I was a kid, and so that's we got the Panavision equipment on a deferment, right? But when we stopped shooting, we couldn't return the equipment because our fear was we needed to finish the film. That's the one thing that we knew. And if we returned the equipment, especially the Panavision camera equipment, that even though Dick was a great guy, he's got, board of directors and shareholders and people to report to, and we would never be able to get the equipment back.
Well, we feared that.
That was our fear. That was our fear.
Or they would be able to hold it hostage, and we wouldn't be able to pay the money, and we would, be in a real shitter.
Right.
So it was a way to protect us from.
And so what we did is I made a deal with the Teamster captain, and they basically, for lack of a better word, hid all the equipment trucks. We made a deal with there was, I think, 3 Teamsters or 4 Teamsters. There was a Teamster captain and 2 or 3 Teamsters. And we would pay him every week. I would go out and scratch together enough cash to pay, I think it was 25% of whatever they were owed on a weekly basis. I would deliver to him in cash. And that was sort of, the price that we paid for him, assisting us in hiding the equipment. And I would get calls from Dick DeBona that were very, very angry calls, just demanding that we return the equipment. And I mean, looking back on it, it perhaps seems it's funny, but I can assure you at the time it was not funny.
Oh, it was stressful.
Yeah.
It was stressful, but as I said, it was once, if we would have been doing a disservice to everybody had we not finished the movie, because the asset that would get everybody paid was the movie, and if the film was unfinished, it wouldn't benefit anybody, So it was our obligation to get this thing finished, even if it meant pissing people off, which we certainly did. And we'll tell you some of the funny stories regarding that. And
The one thing that we did that I think is useful for for young filmmakers just starting out, if you ever run into a situation like this or remotely like this, the people you owe money to, you always talk to. You
yes,
always take their calls. People have a tendency when you're under that kind of pressure, to hide. It's the the fight or flight, reaction that everybody has. But as painful as someone screaming at you at the other end of the phone, they appreciate it, even if they're still angry.
yes.
They appreciate because you're giving them information, even if the information is bad. Because that's what we would talk about all the time was to repeat. We need to finish the film. We're raising some more money. Everybody's going to get paid. You just have to be calm and patient, and we will work this out.
Well, also the other thing is you give bad news, but you also present hope for the, for the future. You don't want to leave them with bad news and only bad news. You
Right.
want to be able to give the bad news, give the reality check, but also say we're this amount of weeks away from finishing the film.
Exactly.
There's a rainbow ahead. Just hang in there with us a little while longer. And frankly, smart businessmen will do that. They'll do it because number one, they really have no choice. But more importantly, they also know that, that you've got to finish it because it would have a really adverse effect on their future business. A film that winds up sitting unfinished, owing people money, is just not going to be good for anyone.
Well, but that was an advantage in an otherwise, stressful situation. The laboratory, the equipment house, both for the grip and lighting people, they had, on their books countless movies that never got finished that they're still carrying, the
Sure.
debt. It's they're going to have to write it off. So, at least to have, two guys that at least we were, young enough at the time. We're going to finish this film. You're going to get paid. They want to hear. You're telling them something that they want to hear. At least, you're not abandoning, all hope. It's convincing people. You have to convey that you've got a plan. You've got to convey that you have the energy and the will and the determination, to accomplish what you say you're going to accomplish, because they do want to believe you.
Now, having said that, there are people that extended us credit who have no real connection with the film business, and the one that came to mind this morning as we were driving over to the studio, we passed Carnegie Deli, and Andy, you want to tell a little bit about Carnegie Deli?
Well, we'd have to jump. Let's say that we raised enough money to finish principal photography. Okay, we've completed the shooting of the film, and we still needed to stretch a dollar, a hundredfold. So now we're in post production, and we went to do the post production re-recording at a studio called Trans Audio, which we worked out a deal that it was a deferment deal with them as long as we mixed the film at night. So the film that was taking up most of the day and late into the evening, up usually until midnight, was Warren Beatty's Reds.
Yes, we used to see Warren Beatty.
Yeah, so
We actually got to see Warren Beatty fat because Warren Beatty became a fan of Luigi's Pizza on the corner, and was
true.
eating pizza pretty much night and day. And it was interesting to see a fat Warren Beatty in the elevator.
Yeah, it's true. So from usually around 10, 11, sometimes midnight. It depended on whenever Warren Beatty released his crew. We would come in and do the post production re-recording at Trans Audio, but we needed to feed the crew that was there as well as ourselves, and Carnegie Deli was around the corner, and Leo Steiner
And they're open 20, at the time they were open 24 hours.
open
I
open
think they
20,
still are.
yeah, open 24 hours, and it wasn't unusual for them to extend credit to film production companies that were working at Trans Audio. So when our production office coordinator, a great lady named Randy Smith, called up and opened up an account under Magnum Motion Pictures, and that's how we fed everybody. So, but we at the end of this post production recording, we owed him a bill of, I don't know what it was.
It was in the thousands.
Yeah, let's say $3,000 or $4,000 because we were there for a few weeks, at night, and we couldn't pay, basically, because it was whatever money we had to go to, completing the film and bringing it to. I think it was the Cannes Film Festival
Right,
as
it was the
well.
Cannes Film
Would have been when we finished it and the first. Opportunity to start licensing the film for distribution. So I'll never forget, we had an office at the time at 1619 Broadway, the Brill Building, which is very famous for its sort of musical history, Tin Pan Alley. And we shared the office with another producer-director at the time. And comes a knock at the door, and there is a rather large fellow, very, very, very buff. Looks like he'd been in the gym all his life. And he said to me, "I'm here from Leo Steiner, and from the Carnegie Deli, and you guys owe money, and I'm here to collect." So he'd sent basically, someone who does collections, which you can certainly understand. And I started explaining the history of the film, what happened, how he ran out of something he totally didn't expect, right? Because the other thing is, be as honest, as you know how to be, because I think that comes through in when you're telling a story that basically is going to result in I can't pay you. You better be convincing. They better have a belief that you're actually not just shining them on. And so at the end of my long story about how we got here and how I don't have the money, he goes, "Look, you got to give me something, right? Give me $50." And I think I had like $20 in my pocket, and I gave him $20. He said, "Okay." I go back to Leo. At least I'm telling him that there's some good faith, and he would come like every week to the office, and whatever we had, if, $50 or $100 or whatever it was, and he'd also, monitored the progress of the film. Right? How's it going? Did you get it?
Yeah, we have Carnegie Deli now monitoring our sales.
Yeah, because I had to tell him still the same thing. We're we're heading towards the Cannes Film Festival, where we'll definitely start writing, but we could, we've working on our sales agents working on some deals. I mean, I would basically be talking, about each territory and what we expected to get, and he loved it, right? He absolutely loved it. So I thought that was a pretty good story. But he would come up and we'd give him something, and then obviously eventually, we paid him all off.
Yeah, it was.
Another unwitting investor in Vigilante, Leo Steiner's Carnegie Deli.
Yeah, that's it was it was interesting because the most of the vendors, our lab, all those people worked with us, and but it's something I would never want to go through again, but it was a necessary thing in order to be able to. I mean, no one's going to give us a career, and if you want to, get things done, the only way to do it is to do it. And you can talk about wanting to be a film director and a producer, and find very soon that you're in your 30s and 40s, and the parade has passed you by, and those opportunities never come again. We were fortunate. We were young. We were energetic, and I guess ballsy, and we just did it, and and I've never looked back, and I've never worked at anything else but the film business. So it's.
But I think it certainly from what it did for me was it there were very dark moments where, again, when you're that young, you know, owing that much money, seems to be an Everest that you'll never be able to climb, but you do. And, to be at that age and to, have been able to do it, I think, going forward and, whatever else I did, in my life, in my business life, I think that was, call it whatever, character building.
But also a great business school.
Absolutely.
This is a great business school. I think that the all of the mistakes we made, or things that we did that weren't conventional, we learned to find out that other people who have built businesses did exactly the same thing. That's at least what I have found. That anybody who's ever gotten things done, it's never been done textbook. It was always done
Right.
by just sheer will and determination.
Yeah, and I think the most successful business people that you talk to say that they've learned more, out of an adverse experience, right? If a product didn't work and they were able to analyze, why it didn't work, what the mistakes were, they learned a lot more out of that experience than a product that was instantaneously successful, going out the door. I mean, I've had numerous conversations like that.
Now, Andy, you can speak about this scene. Now let's get back to some making ofs. This was the day that Joe Spinell was MIA,
Oh, yes.
and I was shooting this scene and using a double for Joe, or what's commonly known as a fake Shemp from the Three Stooges. We were using a double until you could find Joe. You want to?
Yes,
I was on this location. Andy was the outside man.
Yeah, I spent more time in the production office when Bill was on the set, and this is again before. I mean, we look back today. The communication tool was you went to a payphone.
Yeah, no cell phones.
No cell phones, no nothing. Bill would go to a payphone and just say, "Where is Joe?" Now, Joe was one of the great people that it's been ever my privilege to know in my life. He was just he was a fabulous actor, and he was a wonderful friend to Bill and I, and countless actors, and including people like Sylvester Stallone got him jobs when nobody would hire Sylvester Stallone, and he was just a wonderful guy. But by this point in Joe's life, he had began to let's say drink too much and perhaps do some other things. He was becoming a substance abuser, and we needed Joe for this part.
He had always been a substance abuser. Let's be honest. He always was, but it got out of control. This was the beginning of his drinking and drugs, where it became.
It interfered.
It interfered with the work. Prior to that, it never interfered with the work. On Maniac, I have no recollection of him ever not showing up at the set. In fact, he'd be sometimes the first one there because he'd be up all night.
Oh, Joe, yeah. The Maniac was completely different. Joe, we'd finish shooting, whether they were 11, 12, 14-hour days. Joe would go out with his good friend Luke Walter. He'd grab the camera, and they continue shooting.
But this was the start of a different Joe, and on this day he did not show up.
So I had to track him down, and I think I started. There was a bar on 3rd Avenue called Friar Tuck's, which was laughingly, he referred to as his office, and so I had to start there and talk to the bartender.
You have to picture this. I'm shooting, and Andy's trying to track down.
Yeah, like
the actor who I'm starting to run out of shots that I can do without him being there.
So I don't remember exactly what the Sherlock Holmes.
I remember exactly. You called Frank Pesh, and Frank Pesh had, for whatever reason, Frank Pesh had the phone number in his head of the girl that Joe went home with from the bar.
Right. No, I remember that he had. I forgot that it was Frank.
It was Frank Pesh.
I thought it was the bartender at Friar's Tuck. But anyway, if it was Frank gave me the number, I was able to track him down to the apartment of a young actress that he had left the bar with that night, and after quite a bit of work to get Joe out of he was sleeping soundly, got him up, got him to the set.
And I remember you telling me that he kind of sat on the edge of the bed, kind of shaking his head like, oh, God, what did I do? What did I do?
Yeah.
And you were like trying to push him out the door, get him dressed, get him showered or whatever, and,
Yeah,
and getting him to the set.
Yeah, I mean, he obviously had realized that, that he screwed up and he's not a person that, had ever screwed up before. So, yeah, your recollection is better than mine. I mean,
Well, also what I remember is when he finally did arrive, his mother, who was one of the extras in the courtroom, yelled at him in front of the whole cast and crew. And, how can you do this to Bill and Andy? How can you do this?
It was the quintessential Italian mother from Queens. How dare you?
Yeah, there's Joe going, Ma, Ma. So the performance you just saw with Joe was done when he wasn't quite feeling well. Now, do you recall how we got permission from Rikers Island to shoot there? Was there anything? I don't recall the process of getting permission, but I don't, I think we were like, I don't think many films ever shot in Rikers Island.
Did Randy help us?
I
think it was...
that must have been the key, because Randy Jerkinson, the reason we made him associate producer was his reputation and gold shield opened a lot of doors, especially with the bureaucracy. Now, so that must have been it. It must have been Randy who was the point man on it. Now, this guard here, name is Nick Barbero. Nick Barbero was co-owner of a company that supplied cars, picture cars for our film. And one of the things that Nick wanted very, very much was to have a bit role in the movie. And so this was his.
But there's another situation where Nick came up to the office. We'd obviously fallen, behind in payments.
But I think that was subsequent to this. I don't think it was before we gave him this role. The falling behind of the payments to his company, we were always behind, but when he came up, it was to want to go with us to the Cannes Film Festival.
Right. No, but I recall, specifically the first, because he co-owned it with a guy named Gino Lucci.
Right.
Right. And I think we'd done business with Gino before.
Right.
And he, in between when we did business with Gino before and this point, Nick had become his partner, and Nick came up to the office and said, you guys had fallen behind. My point being that it came from a contentious first meeting.
True.
He became a big supporter of the film.
That's true.
Same conversation. We explained exactly what had happened, what position we were in, and I mean, he essentially, continued to stay with us and support us, and said, I also would like a part in the movie.
Yeah.
That was again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you're probably right. You're probably right. That probably, this, by the way, is Frank Pesh, who we've referred to many times already. He's the guy who always kind of pops up in Hollywood stories of the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years. He's the guy.
Was he Joe's cousin?
No, they called
each other cousins,
right.
But they really weren't.
No, Frank ran off to, when I met Frank, Frank's girlfriend had run off with Frank's brother-in-law, causing a more than a minor rift in his family. And he had to leave New York City and ran to California, where he lived with Joe Spinell for a while. And Frank was the guy, the go-to guy. If you wanted actors, you wanted contacts for people, he was the guy. He was friends with, and still is friends with everybody. And great guy and funny guy, one of a kind.
Absolutely one of a kind.
Now, that is Alex Stevens' son, who was in fact actually crippled and from a horrible freak accident of being hit by an ambulance of all things that was racing.
Oh, that's right.
That was racing through the streets to either to or from lunch, but not for any medical emergency.
Right. They were just trying to get through traffic faster, so they turned on the lights.
Yeah, there was something
He was crossing the street.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember that.
hit. It was just so tragic.
So they crippled him, but he had a great attitude, and Alex, you know,
Yeah, he
put him
wanted
in the
to
movie.
do.
He said, no, I'm going to have my son do it.
Now, one of the things is that his head, if you go back and look at it, his head really hits the concrete.
Smashed the ground, yeah.
And when I was there, it was painful to watch.
Yeah.
And he never said a word. He was a professional stunt person, but it had to have hurt big time. Now, there's something interesting coming up in a couple of shots from now. If you look in the middle of the screen, we tried to restore it the best we could, but in the middle of the screen, it's coming up right over here on this shot. If you look very carefully in the middle of the screen, there were some vertical striations in the middle of the film, and it continued throughout this scene, not in every single shot, but in certain shots. What it was is a defect in the Kodak film. We at first thought it was at the lab, but then we finally, after much investigation by Kodak and the lab, it was determined that it was the defective stock from Kodak. Now, the position of Kodak is if they have defective stock situation, they'll give you a replacement of the defective stock, but nothing more. They don't take any liability for reshooting or anything else. That's covered by your motion picture insurance. The problem is that the motion picture insurance at that time had a $10,000 deductible, plus you actually had to shoot and show them the cost of reshoots before they would even consider the claim.
Reimbursing.
So that, in fact, when you have no money, like we had no money, we would have had to go out of pocket, spend the money to reshoot, only to get reimbursed from them. Well, alternatively, what we did is shook down Kodak and said to them, if you don't want this, because we were continuing to shoot because Kodak said that it was a lab issue, and the lab was saying it was a stock issue until it finally determined after many days of shooting, maybe 3 or 4 days of shooting, that it was actually defective stock from Kodak. They, in effect, by denying it at first, and causing us to have to, basically compound the damages, we had them in a position. So we wound up getting a lot of extra free stock, raw stock from Kodak, because they would not go and give us cash, but they gave us a lot of raw stock.
Did we sell some of the stock for cash?
Maybe. I think we did. I think we did, actually.
We had to be let's put it this, we had to be inventive about raising cash.
So we shook down Kodak, and we got a lot of stock from Kodak, and that wound up compensating. And of course, we never reshot. And then when I went to do the high definition transfer on this, because when the prints go into theaters, they get scratched up anyway. So what's the point, And
The fuck do you want?
when we did this high definition transfer, I saw these striations and I go, oh my God, they were so loud, they were so pronounced. And we wound up having to go in and do very careful hand restoration on all the scratches, frame by frame of each of the scratches that was in the middle of the frame, and we were pretty successful in doing it. It looks good. Now, one of the things that happened in this scene here is this was shot in Rikers Island, and I think for whatever reason we were unable to plug into a generator. We were unable to bring a generator. So we had to plug into the power that was at Rikers Island. As a result, if you look carefully at this scene, you'll see a flicker. And that's caused by the HMI lights not being powered by a movie generator, but by the power at the prison. So it's a very subtle thing, and I was able to adjust the flicker a little bit in the transfer, but you could see it ever so slightly. So just remember, don't ever plug HMI lights into conventional
Power source.
power sources. Always use a generator. Now, this location here was a part of a complex that was on the right off the West Side Highway, right on the Hudson River. An abandoned, I guess, a boat, harbor. It was a warehouse harbor, which has since been, I guess it was torn down completely and rebuilt. It's now Chelsea Piers, which is a very chic complex of gym and restaurants and boat yards, very high end. But at the time that the city gave this to us for free, which we thought at first it was a great deal. They gave us all this space for free that we could bring in our wardrobe, all of our props. We built a couple of sets, what we call cover sets. Again, we thought it was a great deal, but we were shooting in the winter. And you can't ask cast and crew to function in the winter on the Hudson River without heat. So the challenge of this location was heating it. So the cost of this was really heating it. So, Andy, do you recall any of that? Because it was really you.
I brought in.
We had brought in like one set of heaters, and then we had to bring in, that was at one cost, and then it didn't work, and we had to bring in more. This free location, I remember costing us, it was a total nosebleed because of the heat issue. So those are the kind of things that get you if you're not careful. Also, Law and Order used to, after we finished over there, Law and Order came in and built a lot of their sets in that same place.
Right.
And I'm sure they had addressed the heating problem more efficiently than we did. God, this is the one thing that really feels dated in the movie. Most of the movie doesn't look and feel very dated, but this is like incredibly dated, yet it was accurate for the period. I mean, there were some of the most outrageous pimps in Times Square you could ever imagine. I saw a photo recently of a pimp who was wearing the same color suit as his car. It was the most unbelievable photo, but it was just that period. You don't see it anymore, but it was the period of the Superflies. And that
was it. I mean, Superfly had such a, an impact on the whole fashion.
Well, I think it was probably it preceded Superfly because Superfly was using the car that was an actual drug dealer's car.
But then
but this was a period. This was the period of this kind of gaudy clothing and behavior that you don't really see that much of, to this extent. And that's what really dates it. Now, this little pursuit takes place in Brooklyn. This was President Street, I believe, in Brooklyn, which at the time was total hell on earth. This was an area that was just terrifying. Even sitting on a camera car at night, it was just going through a desolate, horrible, crime-ridden area of New York. And today it's fancy condos and apartment buildings and a desirable place to live. But this was...
Well, it was desirable for the purposes that you wanted, right?
Well, yeah, it was desirable. It really wasn't hard because, a little bit of backstory on this movie. I mean, although this film was inspired by the Death Wish, the movie Death Wish and the Death Wish clones that came after, it's really a socio-political film more than those other films because this is how New York was in the 70s. The city was near bankrupt or bankrupt, and crime was just so pervasive. There was corrupt politicians and judges, and this movie kind of reflected that period in the 70s. It seems outrageous today, but actually, in some ways, it's coming back to that today with the recession. We're starting to see some of the same crime coming back, although the city denies it. We're starting to see it for people who live here, and corrupt politicians and judges and things like that. You're starting to, for the last few years, I've been seeing more of that going on. I think there's more New York politicians in jail than ever before. And it's a really it was an interesting period. The city cleaned itself up later. It cleaned itself up in the 90s when Giuliani came in, but this was a very bad time. This is now, if you notice, just before the car flipped, if you play back your disc, you'll see that there's fabric, it looks like a sunroof with fabric on it. That's because originally we planned on running the car off a pier in Brooklyn into the East River. And I think the cost of the crane and all of the stuff to fish out the car.
Yeah, to take it back out.
Yeah, we had to modify our original plan, but we had already we already had fitted the car for the escape of the stunt driver with that fabric on the roof.
That was a cold night, and I think you were covering it with 3 cameras.
Yeah,
4 cameras on the West Side Highway.
I don't think 4, but I think 3. And I look at again some of the action in this movie, and I look at when I look at films like this and Maniac. I look at them as film school. I don't look at them as they were really film school. I mean, I made loads of mistakes, things that I learned by doing, and and I also found that the action. I learned better how to do action. When I got into doing the Maniac cop movies and stuff. This movie, the action, feels just a little pedestrian for me, but that's how you learn. You learn by doing, and so I might have covered it with multiple cameras, but I probably would have the angles and lenses, the choice of lenses and stuff would have been different if I was doing it over again. It was too wide, and when you go wide, it dissipates the energy of the action. You have to be tighter.
But I think in keeping with some of the things that we talked about before, you have to. I mean, you learned a lot from these movies. This was how how you learned. It was in the doing.
Exactly, you learned.
And so, you can go to film school all you want, but at a certain point, you're absolutely, when it's real stakes, when there's real money on the line, is when you're gonna learn the most, and it's gonna help you the most.
This scene is one of the scenes I happen to really like, the lighting and Fred's performance and everything else. This had the kind of look of an RKO film noir that I like. Also, what's interesting is this was shot inside. And what we did is we added the sound of a subway to give the feel that it might have been outside. And that he was pushed against the trestle of a train track. But in fact, this was in the same location of that bathroom and some of the other sets of the film. A lot easier to shoot inside than outside, tell you that. And Fred looks really cool here, especially on a big screen. He really, really looks cool. And I like the fact that Fred grew a beard for this film. So he would look different than he did in the black exploitation films that he was known for. It just gave him a more mature, gave him a certain intensity with that beard. And he just looks great.
I'm dealing with my main man.
Now, he says Mr. T here that really bothers me, and I think for some reason I think it was the A team was maybe just after this, I think, and there's something about it. I wouldn't have had him say Mr. T if the A team was before, but I'm not sure. That just always bothered me when he says that. But anyway. Oh, and also the other thing is, it's kind of funny that he's kind of referring to a white man. It sounds like he's referring to a black guy when he says that. Anyway, I got to make note on one thing is the sound on the film. This was an early Dolby stereo mix, and it was. I'm very sound oriented on my projects. I think sound is as important as the picture, and I'm very attention to detail when it comes to sound. And on this film, again, we had no money, but we had extensive sound editing to give a lot of perspective changes to the film. Now, one of the things I did, which I regret, is I split the dialogue so that if we were shooting in CinemaScope, and if somebody was on the right side of the screen, the voices would be towards the right, and if they were on the left, and so on and so forth. The problem in doing that is once you start it, you can't stop it. And I never did it again on any other film, was split the voices, unless somebody was off screen and it would be a hard off screen line of dialogue. I never split the voices ever again after the experience of doing this picture, because it was something that just doesn't work well. And then the worst part is, if you go into a theater and they have crossed wires, which happens more often than you could believe, especially during this time when Dolby was in its infancy. If you go into a place that has crossed wires, you'll have this weird effect of people's voices coming from where they aren't on the screen. Whereas with music, you could flip the tracks and you would never know if the tracks are flipped or not. But when you're hearing people talk, you know that it's something is wrong.
But I also that's another thing that I remember is, although we were under severe pressures that we've talked about before, there's a tendency to just scrimp and just get the film finished, and just as cheaply as you possibly can. And I remember that you were adamant that we still had to finish the film with as much quality as we started out to put in. Like in I'm thinking of the chase sequence later in the film, right? It was to match the weather changes.
Yeah, but that was stupid.
Well,
it was stupid. It was filmmaking immaturity. Now here's where Jay Chataway's score really soars. This is like this is him taking my my Ennio Morricone records and creating something that would be as Morricone-ish as you can get. Especially with the music cutting out, and then using a music cue for the look on Fred when he looks back. All that stuff is so it's my love of spaghetti westerns. I must tell you also, it's fun when I look at a film like this, because as hard as it was to make, there was nobody we were answerable to creatively. So we could do things like this. We could do a Morricone score or Morricone-esque score. And, we wouldn't have some, middle management person at a company saying, well, we want some hip hop, or I guess that would be today, or, anything. There's things that get imposed on you, or things that, people come up with that, it just gets frustrating. Here we were able to actually go with what our instincts were, for better or for worse. Now this is again a studio. This was a set in that same location, and
This is Willie Colon.
yeah, Willie Colon, who was a very popular salsa star, musician, and you know, when we were playing, when we were shooting in certain neighborhoods, I mean, he was just, you know, surrounded by people in the neighborhood.
They didn't care about Fred Williams or Robert Forster.
Yeah,
it was
as far as they're concerned, it was a Willie Colon movie.
Well, Jerry Masucci was a friend of yours, and I came to know him as well. And he had a company called Fania Records,
and he pre-bought the film for Latin America based on having Willie Colon in the movie.
Exactly. He was quite a character. He was an ex-New York detective who went to law school at night and then met either Tito Puente or one of the big salsa
No, it was Johnny
stars.
Pacheco.
Johnny Pacheco.
Johnny
and
Pacheco.
They started
Fania Records.
Fania Records together, which was a very big salsa label at the time.
Now I have to tell you, going up to Fania Records, this was the early '80s, and you know, the Studio 54 culture and all that was in full bloom, and that office was like, you know, going into the office of Al Pacino at the end of Scarface. You know, if you get the picture, if you get the picture, these guys were like partying hardy every night and day, and models all around them.
But I'll never forget.
They were having a great time.
I think one of the first screenings that we had after the film was finished here for friends and family. Jerry brought, I mean, everybody from the Fania All Stars, Celia Cruz, who was, you know, a major salsa star, Ruben Blades. I mean, they were just, you know, up on Times Square. I think we rented one of the Times Square theaters.
Right, the National.
And it was huge, and I mean, you know, I could remember like crowds forming outside simply because all these salsa stars were showing up. They didn't understand what was going on, and we were just they were coming to see Willie in the movie that Jerry helped finance.
As I said before, this is a set totally built at that location. I wonder who do you remember who built this set? It's actually pretty good. No. The bathroom and everything is pretty good in it. This was, yeah, that was a ratchet pull.
Hilamaro, she got.
They put too much power in it, and if you notice, the film was slowed down because they put too much power in the ratchet. She just like flew.
She hit that wall. I thought she was going to break her back.
Yeah, that was pretty heavy duty.
I mean, she was an actress and stunt, you know, a stunt woman, but you know, she was a fairly slight girl.
Right.
And she hit that wall like everybody cringed.
Yeah, that was a little scary.
Yeah, I was like, oh no, please.
Can you believe it? I mean, this is like a real night-for-night exterior that we lit. I mean, with, again, having no money.
Well, that's what I was referring to before. Is you know, you still maintained, you know, whether there's, you know, youthful, you know, folly and mistake in certain instances, you know, you tried for the absolute best, you know, possible look to the film.
I got to say one thing. As a producer, you can't allow the problems of the moment to take away from the big picture. You've got to always keep the big picture in your mind as to what it is you want, because again, you don't serve the little problems if you compromise the big picture.
Right.
You have to always say, look at the steam coming out of his mouth. That's how cold it was there.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just the way it is. You have to always, you know, be uncompromising in what it is you want, or else you're creating a disservice for all the people working hard, and your investors and people you owe money to and everything else. If you just let it down.
Doctor, what the hell's going on around here? I want to see my wife.
God, this is a guy you just don't want to get any news from, do you? You just look at him, you know he's not going to have good news for you.
Yeah, something bad is going to happen.
This was shot at a hospital, as I recall, in the Bronx. I think it was in the South Bronx. And I think that this floor was abandoned, or maybe the whole hospital was abandoned. I don't recall exactly. It was interesting because,
I think it was it was an abandoned hospital, or it was going through some sort of
yeah, you see, again, I'm
transition
seeing
because
the
we had
same
like full
things,
access.
back in the 70s when the city was just going bankrupt.
Yeah.
You had all these places that were available, and now somebody shooting in Midtown St. Vincent's Hospital is now going to be abandoned, and it's I'm starting to see the same things happening again.
Look, it's gonna be all right. We can do something about it.
The great Rutanya Alda.
Yeah,
who was
Tanya Alder, who's married,
married
to
to
Richard
Richard
Bright. Yeah, I see her constantly. She still works all the time. She's just one of those steady actresses who, Richard is no longer with us. He died in a tragic accident. But Ratanya is still a very active actress.
Just remember seeing her in Deer Hunter and just being great actors.
Now, Bob and I maintained a friendship and had done several films together after this. And he was just just a great guy, and he really supported the movie and came with us to the Cannes Film Festival to do publicity. And he was just was just really just a really great guy. He's a great actor, and he was nominated for an Academy Award for Jackie Brown. In fact, Quentin personally told me that this was among the films that impressed him with Bob to write the lead role in Jackie Brown for Bob. So it's it's just really one of the great benefits that came from this movie. Now this. I love the lighting in this location. This is, Jimmy Lemo, who shot this film, also shot Ms. 45 for Abel Ferrara. And I love the look of Ms. 45, and I just knew that I wanted him to shoot this movie based on that one. And one of the things I wanted to do with this film was to shoot it anamorphic, 2:3:5 aspect ratio, because it really bothered me that every time I'd go to see Maniac in one of these big downtown grindhouse theaters, it would be like a little postage stamp in the middle of this giant screen, and it would be inevitably on a double feature with a kung fu film, which absolutely dwarfed Maniac in terms of its look, because all the kung fu films were shot anamorphic. So never to want to feel that I'm being dissed or size. I think size matters in this case, and I wanted Vigilante to be 2:3:5 widescreen aspect ratio, so we would never be dwarfed again by a kung fu movie.
What was it that happened here? Wasn't this like originally the special effects, all the squibs? Like he set them and they didn't go off, or they went off. I remember
Actually, what happened was,
I remember you were like livid.
Yeah, well, what happened was, I think it was like the squibs on the actors went off, but none of the squibs on the car
Right,
went
there
off.
was some disconnect, and it was
So-
again. I mean, at any time there was a setback like that.
So what happened was, we had to go back and sort of do all the shots of the car being shot to intercut with them being shot. So it turned out to be a much more edited piece than originally intended, which I think actually made it better, frankly.
Right.
I think it made it better, but it was not supposed to be that choppy.
Yes. My
as it was.
recollection at the time was you were not happy.
Yeah, well, things like that happen. You learn. It's nothing that you plan actually goes sometimes. As you planned it. So you just have to wing it.
That's true. I was thinking of when you were talking about when Robert came with us to the Cannes Film Festival. He loved it, and he was a great salesman for the film. But again, in keeping with the fact that we didn't have any money, I think it was either your credit card or my credit
Oh
card.
yeah.
It
No,
was
I think I opened
it
a
was
diners club.
It was a diners club. Either
Exactly, to
you
get the
or me
tickets.
or both of us, and we like charged whatever the tickets were.
Yeah.
But that was a similar situation because now we came back and we had, distribution licenses that were signed, and the film was decently, received, such that we could expect in 30, 60, 90 days we could start predicting, a cash flow back. And I can remember having conversations. I remember they were in Denver, so I think it definitely was Diners Club. And it's just so different from today. As I actually had a relationship because same situation. I would explain, how we bought the tickets and why we owed the money and how I was expecting that, the sale for Germany is coming through. And she would literally, I would call, every week, and or she would call me, and another supporter of the film. She said, "How's it going?"
It's so funny how different it is from today, where all these credit, banks and everything are so soulless and cold. And back then, I could go into Chemical Bank and on my signature, get $50,000 unsecured loan in my account. Walk in and walk out with that loan in my account. Whereas today, if you go to a bank, you got to beg and every kind of thing to try to get any kind of capital. And it's
It
just
was the personal. So I think a lot of the things that we talked about were, just a human, response. People helping us, people understanding, and I think.
But I think in general, business was done more like that then.
Absolutely.
Today, I think with all of the efficiencies with the computers and all of the depersonalized, emails and it just is taking away from business happening. It works for big businesses, but as a small businessman, a small business owner, it's just so much more difficult today than it was back then.
Oh, for sure. I can't imagine keeping American Express today at bay for for a month or two.
True.
For a few days would probably be a problem.
Oh, they'll cut you off.
Yeah. But we literally had somebody on the other end of the phone in a big company, sort of rooting for for our success again and helping us out.
Exactly the difference. It's now this is the chase scene that you referred to earlier, where
Right.
with the weather, and it was a really it was a learning experience because it doesn't matter. And number one, you can adjust a lot of it in the lab, not as much as you can when you're doing telecines, but you can adjust it to some degree in the lab. And the other thing is, if you have action going on, people are not looking at the weather. It just doesn't become a distraction. If their focus is on the action, not necessarily in whether it's overcast or sunny. I mean, all this here is all sunny. And then when he comes around the corner, it's sunny. But then all of a sudden, I think his POV shot here is overcast. No, not here. Wait, when he runs down the street. Okay, yeah, here it's overcast. No one gives a shit. They're following the action. We were like so conscious of all this stuff that was totally meaningless. It was totally meaningless. And then once we committed to the overcast over here, then we thought that, we had to make sure that all the other subsequent shots were in overcast. But it's it's just nobody's.
You could say it's youth, and obviously it is, but
No,
it was a situation where we were doing a bigger film. The stakes
Right.
were higher. There was all everything got
Yeah, so there's an
magnified.
insecurity, and
Absolutely.
I think that by having the learning experience of this, when I went on to do other films after this, I had a lot more confidence, and
Right.
I wasn't so precious about every shot. I think on this, I was trying to protect us against negative damage, so I would do some protection shots whenever possible, things like that, which today, or even the next film after this, I kind of threw all that stuff by the wayside, and I just sort of, I would just kind of go out and shoot and not worry about a lot of the things that I worried about on this.
Right.
I don't think it made it a better movie. I think it made it a more costly film, but I don't think it made it a better film. I don't think I don't think sometimes perfection of shots is what you got to strive for. It's storytelling and in this case the action. And that time should have been better spent, maybe incorporating some more gags and things like that.
Right.
Than it was on some of the time we wasted. Now it's interesting when Bob's car turns the corner. That sound of the tires hitting the curb, I remember, were balloons that we had in a studio that we added while we were in the middle of the mix. Now, this was, oh God, what was the name of that street, this boulevard that we're on? It's a major boulevard that's now again one of the...
Is that McGinnis?
McGinnis.
Yeah.
That's it, McGinnis Boulevard.
Yeah.
Now, here's where the stunt driver almost hit the telephone pole. And it's kind of interesting because we had Randy Jurgensen was doubling for the black actor, and Randy is white and was wearing an afro wig and blackface, and was driving the Datsun, in the wide shots. Well, Screen Actors Guild came to the set. Not sure if it was random or someone dropped a dime on us, and went absolutely ballistic that we were using a white guy in blackface to drive the car. So they absolutely insisted on us bringing in a black stunt driver. Well, the first thing when we brought this what we later learned was a very inexperienced person, is he almost hit the telephone pole, which is the shot you saw where he locked up the car just before hitting the telephone pole. But then we have a scene coming up over here on the bridge where the cars go over the bridge and they kind of go a little bit airborne. And you see that POV shot over there. In order to get that POV shot, we had a cameraman hanging out of the hatchback of that Datsun. And we asked this stunt driver to just go over a couple of boards to create the bump as though it was landing after having gone airborne. For some inexplicable reason, he went over the ramp with the cameraman hanging out of the back of the car. Now, because it was a POV shot, I was hiding behind the building that's at the bottom there. I happen to like this scene, by the way, over here, to interject, but if I was doing it over again, I would have had some workers, because it's too empty. But it was empty, and we had one day to shoot it, and it was on a Saturday, and it was the day we could shoot this scene. But it actually came out pretty good, and the music is great. Anyway, so the bottom line on that is the poor cameraman fell out of the back of the car, injuring one of his fingers in some way that would be a lifetime injury, and it was just not a very nice thing. And but that cameraman wound up making enough money that he bought his own equipment rental house. And I can't remember. Oh, Spira, Mike Spira, right?
Mike Spira, exactly.
Yeah, he opened up his own rental
Camera rental, actually.
Camera rental, based on the money he got from the insurance company. That we kind of participated in helping him with deposition and everything.
That's right. And then I think he housed it at 1619 Broadway.
His rental.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was. He did. I love this scene.
You killed my son.
Fuck him. Go ahead, man. Go ahead. This don't mean shit to me.
It does to me.
Now, this is a time when on the high falls, it would be an actual guy falling backwards. When we later did the Maniac Cop films, we would want to shoot them from above so you see where the bodies were going instead of from below. So we used what was called a decelerator on those films, which was a wire that was attached to the leg of the person falling. So it made for a much more spectacular shot. I mean, this was sort of the end of doing those kind of shots where the camera's below and the body's kind of falling towards us. My recollection of this scene over here was we had, again, I don't know how we did it with no money, but we took I think we cleaned out an equipment house of every light they had to
Yes.
light Wall Street.
Yep. It's Battery Park.
Yeah, this is Battery Park, and we lit up Wall Street, and we lit up all the skyscrapers and everything that you'll see later in a big wide shot, and it's kind of amazing, but we did it. Now this guy was the only actor who was a total prick, and he wound up bringing us up on some kind of fines or something with Screen Actors Guild, and we had to later do a settlement with that bastard. I wish he would actually blew him up in the car. I'd have been much happier doing the settlement on that. This ending over here, in my mind, was kind of inspired by the Paul Muni film, I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, wherein Paul Muni kind of goes into the darkness saying he's going to, when they ask, what are you going to do? How are you going to survive? I'll steal.
I'll steal.
But, this is the kind of thing is that Bob Foster chose a road to hell and so on and so forth. But that was the idea of it. On this shot here, by the way, in certain countries, there's a superimposed title. I wish we could find that negative. It would be great. But there's a superimposed title that we created that said that he got captured. And what was interesting, that he was captured and prosecuted for having done the crimes.
They didn't want
right.
the
but what's
impression
interesting
that he got
is,
away with this crime.
But what was interesting is it was always in places where there were dictators.
Yes.
Like the Philippines. The Philippines in particular.
Exactly. The most repressive societies felt that the need to make sure people understood.
Yeah, because they were kind of afraid of their civilians that,
that you can't take the law into your own hands. I think they had a potential self-interest there.
But anyway, there's production consultant Nick Demetrolis, who really was a production consultant. And I'll tell you one thing that Nick told me that always stuck in my mind is he said, when you're making an independent film, never think that you're making an independent film, but that you're making a major studio movie, and always aspire to make something that's on a major studio level. That you don't want to go down. You want to go up. In other words, if you're going to cast actors that are better or bigger than what you would than just getting low rent B names and things like that. And that always stuck in my mind, is being really wise advice. And I'm forever grateful Nick is no longer with us.
He's a great guy.
Great guy. And Rick Dior, who mixed this movie, is unfortunately no longer with us. My God, and he died so young too. He died, I think it was early 50s. I know, it's horrible. It's horrible. Larry Michel. Now, Larry Michel kind of fucked us a little bit on this because when he started cutting the movie, this movie was shot anamorphic, which means you're using 4 perforations and you're going right up to the frame line when you're projecting it. He used a conventional hot splicer to cut the movie, and for a number of reels, if you watched it theatrically and the mat was ever so slightly open on the screen, you would get flashes at every cut. He later realized his mistake and changed to a thinner anamorphic hot splicer. Anyway, for you guys watching it, you're all shooting Super 35 anyway, so you don't have to worry about that. But back when you were shooting 4 perf anamorphic, that was a very important thing. Andy, you got anything to add?
I don't. Dan Sandberg, TVC Laboratories.
Yeah, he was a
great guy.
Great guy.
All
always
these people that supported us were the people at Sin Opticals. They were just, we couldn't have done the film, without these people. Never underestimate the favors you can call on, and also always ask.
Yeah,
You don't ask, you don't get.
exactly. And good. I'm glad this is still on the film. The dedication to Pete Savage. All right, I guess that's it.
Okay.